Hi there. Chapter 20, Awakening. His sleep was deep, and in it he created worlds beyond worlds, and he went far into them, and he lost himself in them. For centuries he slept, weaving dreams that spun in all directions. They took him to places of deepest darkness and brightest sunlight. He felt the winds of the plains take him, and he flew high above the land and reached far beyond the stars. He sailed on solar winds through the emptiness of space. He watched whole civilizations come and go and rebuild themselves only to be destroyed again. He saw the summit of creation and he felt the depth of despair along with the heights of peace among men. He was free, and the longer he slept, the further his dreams took him. And he saw places so ancient they had existed before time, and he glimpsed futures that had not yet been realized, but soon would come to life. Then he awoke. He became aware of his deepest core first. He felt his heart beat against his massive chest. It transported his blood through silver veins, blood that was of darkest blue. One drop of it could kill all forms of life within 100 yards. He began to feel the extension of his limbs, the cold in his extremities, the movement in his scales when air streamed into his lungs. He felt the heat of his breath as it scorned the air in front of him. When his eyes opened, his pupils adjusted to the light. Deep green irises contracted into small slivers. He saw everything at once. The beam of light that pierced the darkness from somewhere high above in the crystalline ceiling. The body of water to his left, its surface reflecting its surroundings in shimmering light. The blackened soil in front of him. He saw the claws in his powerful front talons that could cut into stone, that could carve pillars out of granite. He felt the power returning to his limbs and all the way to the tip of his leathered wings. But something was wrong. He could not name it until he heard it. It was just a whisper at first, then two, then five, then a dozen voices murmuring, sighing in an ever-returning rhythm. The whispers slowly turned into sounds, indistinguishable at first until they became small feet on charred ground, hairy limbs rushing against each other. The light, that was what was missing. It was too dark in here. The light source in the crystallite ceiling on one side of the cave was completely blocked. When his eyes looked up, he saw them, and before he could command his powerful legs to push him off and to burn them into oblivion with his fiery breath, they descended upon him. The spiders came, and while they overtook his steering body, they wove their web and covered him with it. He fought them. He pushed off with his hind legs, extended his wings far to either side. He lifted off, but only for an instant. From afar, it was an image of terrifying beauty. In the semi-darkness of the cave, the massive dragon fought for his life, fought to lift off the ground. But there were too many. The more that fell off of him, the more that jumped onto him from the ceiling. In the end, he lost the battle and was soon covered in a web that left him no choice but to watch what was about to happen. He saw the ivory coat of the Pegasus before he could see what she was. And when he did, when he saw the spiders carrying her while others built a web in the air between two pillars, and when they lifted her lifeless body up and fastened her to the web that spanned easily 100 yards across, and when he saw her beauty in the beam of light that gently rested upon her, he also saw the deep and dark red markings, the inflamed and festering cuts all over her body. When he saw it all, he wept for her. And where his tears fell to the ground, penetrating the charred soil, small flowers began to grow in the darkness underground. And if someone would have visited the abandoned cave only a few years later, she would have seen a sea of flowers covering the dragon's den and the area where he had slept. But now there was only death. The dragon, who could no longer distinguish between his dreams and the lives before he slept, thought he remembered the Pegasus as they fled deep into the mountain 1,000 years since past. They were freed in the mines by a small group of sky people who had no choice but to seal the caves forever. He knew then, in an instant, the whole of Wind's past, what she thought was her betrayal of her own race, and her subsequent choice to be petrified in stone until the mountain would take her or the elements would diminish her into oblivion. And he saw her gaining her freedom, born out of the sheer pain of the war-horse for her imprisonment. He saw the rooster and the wolf, and through her he saw their companionship with each other. And what he had dismissed many lifetimes ago in exchange for an existence in solitude began to stir deep within him, and thoughts of friendship and of the hope it brought came to him through her, and it lifted his heart high above, even though his body was bound to the stone. And he knew that she was alive, that the poison of the vulture had only slowed her heartbeat to a point of seeming death, but that she was still there, faint perhaps, and not for very much longer, but still alive. He held on to this thought, lying there tied with thousands of threads, held tight against the floor. He felt a surge of power coming through him. He thought that he would let it build up until he would no longer be able to contain it, and then he would free her and free himself, and his fury would know no limits. At that moment, the vulture landed in front of him, and when she looked into his eyes, he could not help but see his own death and the shattering of all the hopes he ever held inside. And even though he could feel the life of the Pegasus slowly leaking out of her, he could not muster the strength to oppose the vulture's glance that told him unmistakably of his demise. But that was not what he was afraid of. What he feared the most was just one thing. And when he allowed the thought of it to come into his mind, he knew it could not be undone. He knew the vulture saw it clearly within him. She would not kill him. She would leave him here in the darkness, alive. But she would take his dreams from him, and she would exchange them for nightmares that would last for an eternity.